Hi there, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this segment of Events Reimagined. Today, I'll be talking to Janad Iqbal about the fundamentals of building an event agency. We both have event agencies along with various of our colleagues, and it's so interesting how the pandemic has evolved the events industry as a whole. So, in our conversation today, we'll be talking about how we've had to reimagine the work that we do, as well as just reimagine how to build an event agency in 2020 and 2021. So, again, my name is Georgie, for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time. And I'm the CEO and founder of GSD Solutions. We are a business development agency that specializes in virtual event production services. And Janad, I'd love for you to give us a quick introduction about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Junaid Iqbal. I'm a partner in Ace Virtual Events, and we've done a lot. We've done at least 200 events. We've sort of lost count. And I'm also the founder and CEO of NoDegree.com, where I help people without college degrees find meaningful jobs that pay well. And I host a podcast called the No Degree Podcast, where I interview people without college degrees, have them share their stories. And I think same as you, I just accidentally fell into the event world during the pandemic and it just ended up really taking off.
Nice, nice. And so, did you do events before with you say you have like the program No Degree? Did you do like workshops, or tell me a
Yeah.
little bit
I did
about the business?
I did webinars and stuff. I had originally got into the event world because I got the remote subscription and I wanted to run job fairs on it. Right? I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this is great for a job fair. This is going to be the next thing. I could really see some opportunity." And then if you asked me, I would have been like, "No, I don't want to do events like that. I don't want to be an event agency." And then as I started getting into it, people were like, "Hey, can you run an event for us?" And then we started making some money, and then it just sort of organically happened, and the events got bigger and bigger, and I kind of saw the opportunity. So I didn't even have experience in the event world, and it kind of just shows like if you're entrepreneurial, as long as you're willing to learn, as long as you have a good team around you, you can really sort of almost do anything.
Definitely, definitely. And so, um, what I saw with, the pandemic, because I had been doing in-person events for
Yeah.
years, like for forever. And back in 2016, I started exploring virtual events specifically for my personal need. I was about to have a child, a second child, and I wanted to be more remote, more virtual. I worked remotely, but I didn't think that events were successful remotely. I hated online classes.
Yeah.
I even hated reading, listening to audiobooks. I was like,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is silly. We have to do it in person. We have to have a physical book. Just all these elements to the in-person live experience that were so critical. But as a person, I see you in the community as a super connector, super networker. And when we met, I think we were talking about like the LinkedIn, was it LinkedIn Live or LinkedIn? It was like an event series that you're doing,
Yeah.
like LinkedIn networking. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about, going from like networking
Yeah.
in person to now forming an agency that specialized in networking online. Like, what was that experience a bit about?
So I used to network a lot in person, right? Because we're in NYC, and literally, if
Okay.
you're in NYC, I don't know, there must be at least 50 networking events per day, just depending on what topic. So I actually went to your both physical and you were the first remote event I spoke at. So I used to go to a lot, and I do a lot of in person networking, but obviously when the pandemic happened, you couldn't do that. And
Mm-hmm.
before the pandemic happened, I've been active on LinkedIn for 2.5 years, and that's where like I meet a lot of people. I've gotten over like 20 million views on it, and that's where I've met my business partners and a lot of my workers. So we were doing all these things, and then I was like, there has to be a way, right? LinkedIn was very good. It worked for online networking, but for like big groups, I was like, hey, how do I, you could get on Zoom call. It's like 4 or 5 people. We used to do that. But then once you get bigger, it just became,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't, that's not what it's meant for. And when we kind of saw remote, we're like, hey, we could just kind of hang out, right? This is like a virtual office. And we were like, hey, there was something called LinkedIn Local where people,
LinkedIn Local, that's what it was called.
yeah,
I'm
so
like,
there's
what's
one
that?
in New
Okay.
York City. There are like five. There's one in Manhattan. There's one in Brooklyn. There's one in like out in Long Island, and there's one out in Fort Lee. Right. So there are a lot of them. So I was like, you know what? Why don't I get the people from LinkedIn together? And then we had like a speaker series. So we did that, and it just that ended up people like, hey, I need this. We got an event canceled, and then we just sort of did it, and then we just sort of expanded. And it's funny. My high school was my first client because
Wow.
they used to do a college fair.
Mm.
So reps from colleges would come, kids would go, and they'd kind of talk to them. But obviously they couldn't do it. And then what we did a college fair for them, and it ended up going really well. And it was funny because the college reps loved it because they didn't have to go travel, they didn't have to leave. If no one's at their table, they could just browse the internet. So that's sort of how it started, and it just sort of really evolved over time.
Nice. And you said your previous, well, you still have this business, no degree, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that and like maybe potentially like the importance of doing like, these career fairs and these job fairs and how you saw different, they were different online versus like, your
Yeah.
experiences with those in person.
Yeah, so I started nodegree.com because I want to remove the stigma attached to people without college degrees, because there are plenty of talented individuals who have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of drive, who have a lot of hustle, who have a lot of talent, who just don't get opportunity because they're like, oh, you don't have a degree. Or they're seen as different or not as smart because some people really look down upon them. And they also are sort of have they lose confidence because they're like, hey, how do I compete with someone who went to Harvard or whatever, all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. So they run into those issues. And one of the reasons I sought out online career fairs was that online applications suck, right? Anybody who's applied, like, look, I know a lot about online applications, and that's because I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours sort of learning the system. The average person doesn't have time for that, and even if you spend a lot of research, a lot of the information online is just isn't good. It's like, hey, that's not helpful. That's actually a waste of time. So I found it a way to really recruit, because now you could actually see someone, you could host an event, you could have people come, you can see them, and it's more accessible, right? Whereas in
Mm-hmm.
person, you like you mentioned, you were having your second child. If you're have little kids, it's hard to kind of go networking events. You gotta, it's not just like, hey, I'm going to a networking event. It's like, hey, can someone watch my kids? How do I do it? How long? It's a big plan. It's a big plan. Now with online networking, you don't have to worry as much. So I find it makes it more accessible. You get to gauge more people in a shorter amount of time. And then once things, if you like them, then you could actually take the interview physical. But a lot of interviewing has moved virtual too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just like you said, just the time and money that it costs for transportation, right? And just thinking about just how accessible things could be if you want, and not only does it connect to the bigger world of employment and how people are working, and we have another talk coming up a little bit later about just like careers and job opportunities, right? Before, when everybody was in person, if you wanted to move from work at a job that was in Colorado, you probably have to move there.
Yeah, yeah.
Now you could get a remote opportunity. A lot of organizations are no longer focused on just degrees, and I'm pretty sure the work that you're doing at No Degree has helped that remove that stigma around like, oh, if you don't have an MBA or a PhD, like you can't do these things. And we've seen it's more about doing the work than talking the talk. So I want to talk a little bit about, you said you guys stumbled into doing virtual events because of the pandemic. What are some of the great things that you did, you believe that you did in the early days that kind of secures your footing in this new industry?
I think when new industries pop up, being a first player is a big advantage because everybody is new at it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's one thing. It's that we're not versus traditional event agencies. If we're competing, they have 10 years of event experience, they have 5 years, they have 15 years. Nobody has 10 years of virtual event experience. And if they do, it's like they're lying. It's just like webinars, it's not the same format. So that helped. The other thing is you just learn a lot, and you meet a lot of great people, because you meet a lot of, like, we already knew each other, but we became closer, we collaborated on some events. You meet a lot of the early, because that initial circle is like pretty small. Like for Remo, like we got close to the founding team. That's hard
Mm-hmm.
with some established companies. Like you're not going to get that close to the founding team. So we learned a lot. We grew with them. We were able to give them a lot of feedback, and I know you gave them a lot of feedback. Like, hey, so you sort of can influence the direction of these companies early on. So you get to see, like at that time, like the ability to learn is very important. Like we saw like things that work, we saw things that didn't work, and we implemented them quick. So when you're first in an industry, in a new industry, it's like you have so much opportunity, and you have opportunity to really establish yourself as like a leading player.
Yeah, definitely. Get that foundation solid, meet the right people, start looking at the ways that you could find your advantage and even building out potentially like a niche, right?
Yeah.
Now, we talked about what works. What are some of the mistakes you think that you made in the early days, or maybe now that we're about 19 months in, what are some of
Yeah.
the mistakes that you think that you made while building this virtual event agency?
So we didn't make too many mistakes like that. We've seen a lot of mistakes because I'm always a fan of testing small things. We've seen
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people like they do remote events and there's very limited networking. And it's
Mm.
like I don't know, just all speeches and like 2 minutes of networking. And I tell people if you're not networking, you might as well just use like a Zoom or use Zoom webinar. It's a lot easier to plan. But it's not using the networking. It's also like overcomplicating things. Like at the end of
Mm.
the day, people just want to learn, and they want to meet great people. And I think sometimes people overcomplicate it. Like they're worried about, oh, the tables have to have little virtual candles, and it's like at the end of the day, look, these are nice touches, right? And these help, but the core of it is like I want to meet great people. I want to find people I can collaborate with, and I want to find people I can learn from. So that's I think always have that as a core concept.
Yeah, and so like you said, just not so some of the mistake that people are making is like overcomplicating the event itself, as well as potentially even overcomplicating the services that they're offering, right? Just like trying to get all the bells and whistles, and there's no foundation, like you
Yeah,
said. Just making sure that it's solid. People come away with the event feeling like they met people, they networked. And we keep mentioning Remo. So Remo is one of the platforms that we both use, and one of the leading platforms in the virtual event industry. And I think the best platform out there for networking.
yeah,
If you want to meet people, if you want people to connect and come away with feeling the emotions of being in a space together, that is my go-to platform and my recommendation. um, and so now I want to shift into what was, if you had to label one thing as like the hardest part of this process over the last 19 months of building this virtual event agency, like what would you identify? And if it's like
yeah.
one or two,
The
what was the hard part?
the hard part is definitely not knowing what's gonna happen. Like when I started in March, I had no idea that it was gonna grow to this size or pandemic was gonna be this long. Right, you just really have no idea. And then the other thing is you just don't know where these companies are gonna go. You don't know if these companies are gonna go acquired. You don't know which direction they're gonna go. You don't know if they're gonna shut down. And I'm not saying they are, but these are all these things as a business owner you kind of think about. Like, what if
Mm-hmm.
Remo shut down tomorrow? What would I do? What platforms would I go? And just that it's so much unknown now. Like now there are a lot more platforms that are having some of the more uh like the similarities of Remo, and it's still like we always were like, hey, what's gonna happen when physical events return? Now we have a better idea because we know that it's here to stay. But obviously, it's going to transform. Because I remember in the beginning, people like they had to do virtual if they wanted to do something. Now they have more options, so it's just kind of navigating that. It's always tough. That's like being an entrepreneur. You just never know what's going to happen, but you got to just roll with the punches.
Yeah, definitely. One of the hardest part I would definitely agree is, just the constant changing of the industry. And now with vaccines being available and people going back to more in-person events and again, like the hybrid model, I think for me, one of the hardest parts is just getting explaining to people and getting them to commit to, we don't know, no one knows what's going to happen next,
Yeah,
so do what you can now, and if you have to, if you do want to go back in person at some point, fine, because I think a lot of companies are still afraid to dive in. I know some companies that said we're going to just stop our events
yeah,
until we go back in person, and I'm like, that was 18 months ago. I
yeah,
think that's not a good idea anymore.
yeah,
Let's do one or two virtual events. Let's get your foot in the water, because the wave is here. Like the wave has come. The wave, some people were washed away with that wave when they just chose not to do it, and some businesses no longer exist because they just said no, we're not going to do virtual events or hybrid events, and now they had to like, either shut down or just completely reinvent, completely reimagine their business model and business structure. And I think one of the biggest things is like a lot of people are now saying, hey, we're going to just wait off a little bit until we can do an in-person event, and we'll get the sanitizer,
yeah,
we'll get the scanner guns. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
have fun waiting, because no one knows,
yeah,
just the other, now many people are becoming unemployed, due to vaccine mandates. And so the industry is shifting again. Some people will not go back to working in their respective either healthcare or
Yeah.
education fields, and that looks like maybe getting a remote job, doing remote work. Unemployment has shifted, and so now more people are in the job market, but there's still a global hiring shortage. And so what does that even look like for what different work opportunities? Maybe there's going to be a completely online school built on remote. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's so much changing by the minute, by the day. Platforms are updating, platforms are disappearing, and so just like keeping up with what's happening is like I
It's
think
a
one of
it's a
the
it's a
hardest
lot. I
parts.
mean,
Yeah.
compared now to before, there's so many more platforms now. Before it was like a handful
Yeah.
of platform. I know Remo hopping. Now there's like all these, right? There's like Goldcast. I know Airmeet was always around, and then they're
There's like
like,
Sparkle and
yeah,
Gatherly. I'm just
yeah,
like, can y'all?
yeah,
There's a lot of names.
yeah. But you know what the a good thing is that clients don't care what you use. They just care like, hey, can we do X, Y, Z? Yes. Okay, cool. So clients are pretty not sensitive to, as long as it happens and it works well, they're pretty okay with it. But it's interesting. It's interesting. Like, we're always kind of looking at other platforms and always staying on top of things. But you know, the other thing is, it's like one thing I really love about virtual is that I don't ever have to leave my house. Like, look, I like leaving my house, but it's nice that I could just do so much more. Like, I could just stay in front of my laptop, get my work done, and then meet people, and I can do two, three events, 4 or 5 events if I really wanted to in a day, and still keep up with my work, and still have time for myself. So that's one thing like virtual makes a lot more accessible. And it's like you could meet people from like other states, you could meet people. So I think, like, that's like a big advantage. Like for me now, it's like an in-person networking. I was like, look, I could just go to virtual, stay in front of my computer. I could check my email, do all these things, and still get sometimes even a bigger benefit, right? Like I've met all my business partners on LinkedIn, other than one who I knew before, and it's like I met my workers on LinkedIn. So it's like, I can spend like an hour on LinkedIn or go somewhere else. So it's really changing how we're doing a lot of things.
Yep, absolutely. And I want to highlight what you said in the beginning of just how it's just made everything more accessible. It's just really, building a virtual agency has allowed for just unlimited opportunities and potential. And I would say, as a person that is a super networker, similar to myself, you're gonna become a little antisocial when you go back out. I know that when I first started, I went to an event in Miami in July, yeah, July, and Miami, they're open, they
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah,
wide open, and so many people weren't wearing their masks, and so I'm just like, there's
yeah,
people, they're gonna want to talk to me. Why are they so close to me? And so just definitely preparing for that on a side note, and you know being virtual has also it has its good and its bad benefits.
yeah,
I this is just like a little tidbit of something that happened the other day. We were doing an event, and it was a very intense 5-day event, high moving parts of the event that your team supported. And when the event was over, it was just so high level stress that I was
yeah,
literally delusional about links. I
yeah,
fell
yeah,
asleep,
yeah.
and someone was asking me to go somewhere, and I'm like, I can't go, I don't have the link.
That's funny.
And then they're like, "It's no, get up. You could go. You could walk there." I'm like, "I can't go. I don't have the link."
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there are a lot of links in virtual. You have this link, you have that link, you have the attendee
Connecting
link.
this to that and
Yeah,
moving around, and and so I'm so glad platforms like Remo have made that a little bit easier. I remember connecting buildings
yeah,
was crazy, and so again, the platforms are just changing so fast. If you were to come across, so now I'm going to ask, if you were to come across a company or a person that wanted to start a virtual event agency, do you think it's too late? Is it the perfect time still? What advice would you give to a person that is right now thinking of either finally converting their in-person events to virtual, or starting a virtual event agency from scratch?
it's tougher than before because if you look at like a lot of these platforms we look at, they're like yearly fees of 16 to 20K. Before,
Mm-hmm.
when we started, I didn't have that. I was like, hey, pay a couple
Yeah,
hundred
as
to
you
1,000 a
go.
month.
Yeah.
Nothing. That's, you split it with someone, it's still somewhat reasonable. Now 16 to 20K, it's like that's a big investment. That's like, hey, it doesn't make sense because I don't want to drop 16 to 20K and then I don't use it that well. So it's a little
Mm-hmm.
tougher, but I do find that you can still do it. I would recommend if you're looking to start one, look how other people run their events, look at how things are done, and find out your niche. Like there's right now, it's like since it, I got we I got lucky that we were one of the earlier ones, so that we got like this client base. But if you don't have the client base, maybe focus on, hey, we only focus on XYZ industry, or we only focus on this type of event, or we only focus on, and you'll do a lot better, right? So that's kind of what I would do, and look for collaborations. Find ways to collaborate with people. I'll tell you what's one thing that I know that's always tough is like event marketing is tough. Like, look, I could run a
Yeah.
client event, I could do all those things, but event marketing, like I'm telling you, it's not easy. So if you learn that, I guarantee you, you'll be very wealthy because if you do well, it's it's not easy getting attendees because a lot of our clients tend to be associations. So they
Mm-hmm.
have their email list or companies, which sort of like you have to kind of go. Now, if you're running your own event and you're trying to get butts and seats, it's tough. Like, how do you use Facebook ads? Do you use this? How do you need an email list and building that? So that's something that you kind of want to do. And here's the other thing I've heard of people making very good money off virtual events, small attendees, but very strategic attendees. They know how to get one of our clients, they know how to get like high level directors. They get other people to pay because, these are potential clients of theirs. So there's still a lot of opportunity, but, figure out like where you stand.
Yeah. So figure out, so just to sum up, figure out a niche inside of the industry, not just only producing events for everyone, but can you get a subset of the market? Can you do something different in in the event production
Yeah.
roadmap, where it's whether it's marketing or maybe even post production is another big thing, where it's
Yeah.
like you're reinventing how these videos look, or pre recording productions, and so doing the pre-record video editing, graphic editing, and then working with an event agency to then air the show. You don't have to worry about the technicalities of the show, but you created this beautiful video, you still get your credit. So there's different ways and different foots inside of this industry, and everyone is looking for partnerships. I had a conversation previously, and we just really highlighted that even though we're both event agencies, or multiple agencies are out there, the key element is to collaborate, right?
Yeah.
I've worked with Janad's agency has worked with mine. Various agencies that people would maybe think, oh yeah, these are competitors. We're like, no, we're actually collaborators. We're actually
Yeah.
partners. There's so much fish
There's
in the
so
sea.
many
There's so many
events. Like,
opportunities that even if you took 100 clients, there's still hundred
yeah.
thousands. There's still more
There's
for everyone else.
like here's the thing I tell people, like I can't handle 1,000 events next month. It's like there's no way. Maybe in like 2 years. There's so much planning, so much coordination. Like, and we have one of the biggest teams, right? We've done up to like 80 to 100 people working in collaboration on an event, and then. But look, once past that, I can't. I don't have 500 people ready for events. It's not easy because you got to train them up. There's I've always been like collaboration over competition. Like I write resumes. I have a lot of resume writer friends. I've taught them things, they've taught me things, and I found there's enough more than enough customers to sort of have it, and we each, I think it's better to share the wealth as opposed to just trying to
Absolutely.
fight for the scraps.
Yeah, 1,000% agree with that. And so now to start to close the segment, and if there's anyone in the chat that is watching live that would like to ask some questions, if you're watching the replay, definitely still add some questions. We'll be periodically checking and responding to the questions in the comment section. But if you're watching live, feel free to submit some questions. But now I want to ask you, Janelle, what comes next for your agency, Aids Virtual, and the work that you're doing in the virtual industry? Is there something top of mind? Is there, some roadblocks? Just what comes next? Here we are
I think
18 months later. What comes next?
getting some of the big, like, we're closing out a contract with a big company, and then because these big companies, like when I look at their budgets, it's like some of them spend like 100, 200, 300, 400K on certain like multi-day events. So it's like we're looking for those larger events to just really scale, and we can support their events, and we're just making polishing ourselves, just making sure that some we have a lot of tech support people, but a lot of people who are more comfortable hosting these events, right? A lot of more
Mm-hmm.
people who understand are more independent, and just more people who can talk to clients, because before it was just me and my business partners talking to clients, but kind of getting our workers to talk. So just kind of expanding and being sharper and being more independent, because now there are certain events that I'm just like, hey, cool, we send our workers, I'm not even really involved in. So that way, because especially when you have 3 4 events, it's like, hey, you need to
Exhausting.
just focus, you need to focus on this event, you need to focus on this event, and hey, only message me if it's really like things are really going crazy. So that's kind of just making sure that we're ready to scale, ready for whatever. And then we're always ready for a change, we're always ready for like a transformation, because it's like, as an entrepreneur in like an industry that just kind of happened overnight, things change overnight too. So we're just always ready, making sure that we have exit options and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for being a part of this segment with me, Janad, talking all about, the fundamentals of building an event agency and just some of the ups and downs that have happened over the last
Yeah.
365 plus days of this new experience. And as we continue to grow our event agency, as we continue to work with the ever changing model of what events will look like, as we reflect back to the past of events, as well as reimagine what the future of events would look like, this is an ever going conversation. So thank you everyone that tuned into this session live, and thank you everyone that is watching the replay. Again, put your questions into the comment section, and we'll be checking the comments and responding to comments as time goes on. But any final words of advice or any final comments that you have for the audience, Janad?
Yeah, virtual isn't going away. It's here to stay, right? It's been here 18 months. We've talked to a lot of clients, and they're gonna use it. It's gonna be a part of your strategy. So it's like, utilize this, right? Realize that there are a lot more virtual events, that you can meet a lot of people virtually, that you can learn a lot. Like, I'm telling you, there's I wish, like, when I was like younger, they had all these virtual events where you can watch these webinars with these high level speakers. So realize that, establish your digital presence. That's how you get
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, and it's going to open you up to so much knowledge and opportunity, that don't ignore it. Don't just kind of, because if you do, you're just going to get left behind.
Absolutely. So don't ignore it. This is not a trend. This is not a phase. This is happening. This is real life. There's grand opportunities, but you have to take advantage of it. Go out there, network, meet people, create partnerships and collaborations. You could definitely find myself and Janad on various social platforms. Mainly LinkedIn is one that we are on often. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. And as well as in the replay of this video, you'll see in the comments below, the description below, contact information for the two of us. So thank you so much for being here with me, and we will talk again soon.